Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Career Journey Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brittany Avila. And on today's podcast, we have Dr. Diane Finley, a professor of psychology. And this episode is really great to understand a career path that's full of twists and turns and not necessarily conventional, as Diane would say. She talks about starting her career trying to be a reporter, moving to being a high school English teacher, then a professor, office manager, counseling, even interested. Now she's in sports psychology. Diane has done it all. And this episode is full of amazing information on kind of how to succeed in graduate school, moving around in academia, or how to find your career fit, figuring out how to find jobs in academia. She also talks about how to make money on the side, so how to have side gigs, how to kind of think about your future, especially if you're going into teaching at any level. What can you do to help further your career and to help you make money? Some things in this episode, there are some acronyms that we discuss that I wanted to kind of expand on before we start. We talk about the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, the main association for psychology. We talk about STP, which is the Society for Teaching of Psychology. It's actually a division within the APA. And she also mentioned Psychi very briefly, and Psychi is the International Honor Society for Psychology. So without further ado, please enjoy Dr. Diane Finley. Hey everyone, welcome to the Career Journey Podcast, where we explore exciting careers and how to get them from the people who've lived it. I'm your host, Brittany Avila. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy. All right, well, thank you for being on the podcast. Sure. And we usually just start at the very beginning. So what did you think you might have wanted to do when you were a kid?
Well, when I was a kid, such a long time ago, I remember always playing school. I was always the teacher, and so forth. I have, back when I was a child, parents used to send you out the door after breakfast and tell you to come back at lunch,
right,
and not worry about you. So it was much safer time. We rode our bikes to a park that's like 5 blocks away. When I went back to the neighborhood a few years ago, and I'm looking at the park bordered a major highway. I mean, the things that we used to do
could never be done.
You can't do today. But I had 5 brothers and sisters. My sister's way younger than I am, so it was the 4 boys and me. And then within like a 4-house radius, there were about 12 or 15 kids, all in roughly the same age range. So we used to just get thrown outside and do stuff. Mm-hmm. And I remember playing school. My mom had been a school teacher. My aunt was a school teacher. My grandmother had taught school. So following those career development theories, you're going to go with what you know. Because even though my dad was an engineer, girls wouldn't have done that back when I was little. I mean, it didn't
seem like an option.
Well, you couldn't even have gotten into the engineering schools.
Right.
Back then, some state schools didn't even admit women into anything other than arts and science, which basically was education, and nursing. You couldn't go into the regular departments. So your options were more limited. So I don't recall my parents limiting them, but what little TV we saw, because we only had 2 channels. And, the books that you read, it was just sort of what you did. So did that. Then when I got into high school, I decided I wanted to be a reporter.
Oh, nice.
There was a paper. We had moved up to Maryland by then from Louisiana. And in Baltimore, there was a paper called the Baltimore News American, which does not exist anymore. Mm-hmm. If you come to Baltimore, the building that it was in is down near the Inner Harbor. And so there was a reporter on the paper whose name was Neil Swanson, who had won a Pulitzer Prize for writing novels and was a well-known reporter. Found out later he had a very colorful personal life, which I didn't know anything about at the time. But he decided that young people should have their own section of the newspaper. And so it was on Sundays, and it was called Young World. And it was kind of like a magazine section. Mm-hmm. And so he had I don't know, 2 or 3 reporters, I think some of them were college age, who were like regular reporters. And then he we didn't get paid, a bunch of correspondents from the various high schools and areas around Baltimore. So I was working on our school newspaper. So I'm assuming that's probably how I got to that position. Right. And so I became a correspondent for the News American, and I still have a scrapbook. My mother saved all the articles I wrote and everything else. And when I was a junior in high school, he called and asked me to be a reporter.
Wow.
So I used to, my parents would drive me about 35, 40 minutes away. I would take a bus into Baltimore. Bus would let me off downtown near the arena, and I would walk from there to the building. Yeah. There's no way anybody would let a 16-year-old do that today. I look back, that just would not happen. And so I spent all day Saturday working there. I made $1.65 an hour. And that was big stuff. And then I continued to do other writing for it throughout the week. And there were a couple of other high school students there, and there were a couple of college students. And I was able to get interviews. My biggest one that I did was with Paul Revere of Paul Revere and the Raiders. Wow. Which was a really big group back then. If you Google them, look them up, because I'm sure nobody I'm speaking to would know who they are. But they dressed up like Paul Revere, uniforms and stuff. And the lead singer was named Paul Revere. I don't know if that was his real name. They were very much clean cut as opposed to some of the other stuff that was out there. And when they did a concert in Baltimore, they got me a backstage pass, and I went and interviewed him and did an article for the Young World section. So when I went off to college, I was going to be a political reporter, because I was always sort of interested in politics, and I'd gotten much more interested. This is the late 60s, early 70s. So there was a lot of stuff going on in the country. And so I had decided I was going to be a political reporter, sort of like Cokie Roberts, who was always sort of one of my idols. Her dad was actually from Louisiana. He represented Louisiana in the House, and then her mother took over after a plane crash that killed him. So I went off to college. After my first semester, I actually decided I didn't like college and I wanted to quit.
Oh, wow.
So, and my father said, I don't care where you go, but you're not quitting college. So you find someplace. So my best friend was at Notre Dame of Maryland in Baltimore. So I transferred there. And I became an English major and political science major. And we had a woman who was the Democratic National Committee woman from the state of Maryland who taught our political science courses. And so she got us involved, and we went to Washington and got some behind the scenes things. We worked some political campaign things. And then in the elections of 1972, I sort of got pretty discouraged. There was a lot of stuff going on. And I decided I didn't want to be a political reporter anymore. I had enough credits to be a high school English teacher. So I changed my major to English, and I got a job teaching high school English when I finished college. So I taught high school English for a couple of years. And then I loved teaching, but I was very young. I was very young looking. And I think it's difficult for a 22-year-old to teach a class of seniors when you've got 18 and 19-year-olds in the class.
Right.
And so, but, and I became the drama teacher. I had to do the plays and direct the plays. I'd done theater, so that wasn't really a big deal. But I wanted to travel. And my oldest brother was in the Army and got stationed in Germany. And the military at that time ran flights for family. I think it was like $250 round trip to Europe.
Wow.
So I said, okay. So I left my job at the end of the second year, and I went to Europe for about 5 months and backpacked around.
Nice.
Using that as a jumping off point. I stayed at hostels. I had a Euro rail pass where you could just hop on and off. I look back at some of the things I did now, and I'm just like, oh my goodness. Yeah. As an older adult, I'm sitting here thinking, oh my Lord. I understand now why somebody that age would do some of those things. And it was much safer back then. To make a phone call, you had to go to the post office and stand in a long line to make a long distance phone call. There were no cell phones. There was none of that. So there would be days when nobody knew where I was or what I was doing. I kept a journal. I've actually shared it with a couple of students that I've had who were going on travel adventures of their own. It was a great experience. I'm still friends with a couple of the people that I met, but I met people from all over the world because everybody stayed in the hostels because they were so cheap.
Yeah.
And stuff. And so, and then, the money starts to run out. So I came back, because even my first teaching job, I was making, I think, $7,000 a year. Now that I was teaching at a Catholic school. So it was less than I would have made in the public schools. But even if you worked in the public schools, you weren't going to make that much more. Right. So, I came back and did some odd jobs. And then, I ended up, my family stuff. My dad got transferred back to Baton Rouge to work at the plant down there. And my youngest brother wanted to finish high school up here. So I took custody of him and got a job teaching in the local public school system so that he could stay up here and finish his senior year. So I'm being mother to an 18-and-a-half-year-old,
it's got to be hard.
Really an interesting. That was just really an interesting experience. Sort of, get called by his principal. I have to go in and see his vice principal. It was just. But I was young enough. It all worked out. And while I was teaching, so I went back. I was teaching English again, and while I was doing that, I had a student come into my class and say, my mother just kicked me out of the house. What do I do? And I'm going,
I have no idea.
Yeah. I mean, that was not in my experience.
Yeah.
I mean, people got into arguments with their parents, but parents didn't just kick you out, especially when you were still in high school. So I went down to the English office and called the counselor and said, she's coming down to see you right now. But at that point, I realized all of my education hadn't even prepared me to really deal with what students were dealing with. I mean, I was just sitting there going, I mean, how does a parent kick a 16-year-old out? Now I know a whole lot more about all this kind of stuff that goes on. And this was also at a time when there were divorces and there were single parents and everything else. But if you were, it wasn't really talked about. It was still the nuclear family and the happy-go-lucky. And this was a fairly wealthy area where this public high school was. So, and with all of the misconceptions that we had, well, this doesn't happen in rich areas.
Right.
Which I know now that's not true, but, so because I guess I was like 25 at that point. And so then I decided that what I really would like to do was learn more about that. So I transitioned into looking at programs in counseling. And I actually read back in there, somewhere in there, I spent a year in a creative writing program full time. It wasn't great. I know I'm not great. I thought I was greater then than I know now. But
doesn't that come with age?
Yeah, and it comes with reading a whole lot more, and also realizing I wasn't going to make a living at it. So then after that experience, I decided to go into counseling, and I went and got my master's in counseling. Along the way with that, I found a job. I did an internship at the University of Louisiana Lafayette, which used to be called University of Southwestern Louisiana. We would drive across the Atchafalaya Swamp once a week because it was hard to find internship places. And I wanted to work in the counseling area. I mean, the counseling level of university, college thing. So another student and I would drive across every week, drive all the way back. And after I graduated with the degree in counseling, I found a job at USL, or ULL now, in the Catholic Student Center. So I became a campus minister.
Okay.
And the reason they actually hired me there is because the counseling center only had one counselor. And the pastor of this, down at USL, the Catholic Church is smack dab in the middle of campus. That area of Louisiana, and since you're from Mississippi, you may know, it's about 85% Catholic. And so the Catholic Church had a lease for, I think it was 100 years for $1 a year.
Wow.
So they built their church right in the center. And they used to run school buses from the towns and the parishes, parish being a county, around the institution. And they would drop them off at the student center, at the Catholic Student Center, not the regular student center, the Catholic Student Center. And they would lounge around there all day when they weren't going to class. So I probably got to interact with more students than I would have otherwise. My internship supervisor was the one person at the counseling center, so I had him to use as supervisor as I'm learning how to be a counselor. So I spent 2 years there working as campus minister and did a whole bunch of different things as campus ministers do. You're not just counseling all day long. I worked with community members. I worked a lot with the international students. I worked a lot with athletes because they knew that I didn't think they were dumb jocks. I come from a very athletic family. My dad went to high school and college on athletic scholarships. 2 of my brothers went to college on athletic scholarships. One of my brothers was an All-American in lacrosse. And we were the sort of family that when somebody was doing something, everybody went and watched. So I grew up watching a lot of sports. I swam competitively for 15 years. I was no good. I mean, I wasn't any good, but I did it. I mean, because that's what we did. There weren't a lot of girls' sports when I was in school.
Yeah.
So I played 1 year of volleyball, and I remember the uniforms came down below our knees. So you should try playing volleyball in pants that are cotton. Not like stretch cotton, but just like cotton that come down below your knees because that was considered modest.
Impossible.
And then when we moved up here to high school, they played things like field hockey. Well, we didn't play that in Louisiana. So the sports that they had at the high school where I went, I didn't know any of them because where I came from, you didn't have them. So swimming was really one thing that girls could do. My dad had won letters in swimming in college and everything else. So we all swam. Didn't care whether you wanted to swim or not. You were going to swim practice, you were going to swim. So it was the time when we didn't realize we didn't have to listen to what our parents said. So if they say, go do this, you do it.
Right.
So, but because I had grown up and had an understanding of it, and because so many of the athletes were Catholic and were hanging out there, they came to see me instead of going to the counseling center. And so, and I was like, I really like working with this. Around that time, the field of sports psychology was beginning to reappear. And I don't want to go into the whole history of sports psychology, but it was there for a while and then it went away. And so it began to come back. And so I decided that what I really liked about my campus ministry job really was doing the workshops that I did, which is going back to the teaching and doing the writing for the little local bulletin and papers that I was doing. So I decided that I didn't really like sitting there and listening to people's problems all the time. So the counseling part of it was like, okay, but not really what I wanted to do. Yeah. So I moved back up to Maryland and got into a doctoral program at the University of Maryland in human development because they would let me take my minor courses over in what was the PE department, is now kinesiology and sports science, so that I could get training in sports psychology. I was already a nationally certified counselor. I was a certified professional counselor. This was before counselors had licenses. So I had all the certifications I could get as a counselor, but I needed the sports psychology stuff to be able to really do that. So I moved back up here. I got a job teaching high school again so that I could reestablish. I needed to reestablish residency. Maryland was not as generous as the state of Louisiana at that point. I went back and went to Louisiana, went to LSU for my master's. For my cousin did get me a job on campus. I paid $35 a semester in student fees.
Oh my gosh.
Because they let me go as a resident. So I didn't have to pay any out-of-state fees. So, Maryland made you establish residency again. So I started taking a couple classes and reestablished residency. I then actually got a graduate assistant position in the human development department. So I moved to teaching college, which is where I really found what I like to do, because I didn't have to call mom and dad when somebody didn't come to class. So I was still doing the teaching. I was doing writing that was not super academic and stuff. And so I got into my doctoral program and worked my way through that. I will say that part of my interest in mentoring has come from the fact that I had none.
Yeah.
I mean, I had zero.
Wow.
My advisor did not even show up to hood me at graduation.
Oh my gosh.
And didn't tell me that she wasn't coming.
So none.
So none. So nobody said, get involved in STP. Nobody said you should write an article. Nobody said, to do this, that, or the other. So it really, when STP started the mentoring program, I was like, yeah, people really need that. And I'm sure that there are other early career people out there who are experiencing that same thing. Hopefully not very many, but they didn't really teach me the things I needed to do in order to really become a successful academic.
Well, and I think sometimes even if you have a decent mentor or a good mentor, sometimes you still need more than one, because there's so many different ways to approach things. Having different perspectives or people who just have different experiences in different areas is beneficial.
Oh, I think so. But I think at a minimum, graduate faculty should be saying, okay, you need to present at conferences while you're still in graduate school. You need to think about the fact you need to turn your dissertation into some articles. Yeah, there was really none of that.
Yeah.
And there are a number of reasons why, but it's neither here nor there. And so finished there. I knew I wanted to teach at a smaller liberal arts college because that's what I had gone to. That's where I really felt most comfortable. I obviously did a dissertation. I got one of the Science Directorate Dissertation Awards from APA. But it was not really, wasn't my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah.
And so I liked the writing part of it. Some of the other parts were just not what I really wanted to do. So I got a job at a small liberal arts college down south. So I moved and, started teaching and doing the things that we do. Along the way in there, my dad had to have cancer surgery. And when I went home for the summer after the surgery, there were a number of things going on. I began to realize something wasn't really right. He'd left all his EOBs in his desk drawer. He told the insurance company, or told the doctors he'd file everything for insurance reimbursement. And I'm going, okay. But everything was just in a drawer. And my mother had said a couple of things. I noticed a few things. And so it became clear something was really not right. So I left that job, which it was sort of a mutual parting. I wasn't really fitting in there as well as could be. I had become a little bit more of a Yankee than they wanted. And it was sort of So not if somebody tells, I mean, that's one of the things you have to look at. When you get a job, it may not be a fit.
Yeah.
And I didn't have another job. I wasn't, but I had this family thing going on that I needed to take care of first. But I think you have to recognize when it's not a fit, and that there are other things that you can do. Because I think sometimes people stay in those jobs and they're really not happy, and that spills over to the students. And this was a very small town, so there wasn't really a lot else that you could do to make it workable, because you could go do other things and stuff. So I moved back up to Maryland, and I spent a year having my father tested, because you have to eliminate any possible diagnoses that could be treated. And you have to get all the legal documents in order before you get them diagnosed, because once you have that diagnosis in the paperwork, it's kind of hard to do some legal documents. So I spent a year just doing that, and I was not working during that time. The next year, I became an office manager for a property management company. Because
wow, completely different.
Well, I do have to say my brother owned the company. My brother and his partner owned the company, and their office manager had left. And so, and I had periodically, when I was in graduate school, done a little bit of side work for them, photocopying and mailing things out. So I became the office manager, and I was teaching a couple of classes at some local universities that I had found adjunct work, and they would let me leave when I needed to go teach those courses. So it worked out for everybody. I mean, making minimum wage and stuff, but you've got to do something. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I got a job at a local community college because it was advertised. And I went and I interviewed and I got the job. And it was a community college system that had 3 community colleges within the county. And then the county legislature decided they were going to merge them all. So they merged them into one. Oh. Well, when they did that, it made more sense. I don't know why you would have 3 separate campuses with 3 separate everything in administration. And the county is paying for it. The county people are paying for it. So I became the only person in the department without tenure, or that would never get tenure, because they eliminated tenure for any new hires. Oh. So I was the one going to anything that nobody else would go to. Like if they get somebody from the department. I didn't have a contract in May. So I started looking, because I'm like, and they're going, oh yeah, you're going to get one. Well, here's another lesson. I don't believe them. And stuff. So I started interviewing at other places in the area, and I got a job at another community college where I had adjuncted, and they do have tenure. So I've been there now for 20 years. And it's a good fit, because I'm able to help students who might not think they could do college. Right. There are some disadvantages. You teach 5 a semester. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on. But I didn't really have an option, because I was at that point taking care of my dad. And so I had to stay local. And once I got past that first year, I was really able to set up a schedule that made me able to do that. And so sometimes I think you have to look at jobs. And by the way, I think for young professionals out there and graduate students getting ready to look, community colleges are great places. If you're really interested in animal research, it's not the place for you. Right. But teaching. If you want to teach, and even if you want to do research on some other things, as long as you don't expect a big lab with grad assistants. Right. I mean, they're happy to have us do research. Our teaching comes first. And that's the primary thing on which we're evaluated, but we're expected to stay current in our field, whatever that means. And, they're happy to have us get involved in professional organizations. I've had more financial support at times than others. Sometimes they'll have a program where we'll pay all your expenses, sometimes not. It just varies, sometimes with the budget, sometimes with whoever's president or provost or whatever position governs the money. I've been able to do interdisciplinary things. I have done a lot of writing with curriculum. It's there that I got trained really to teach online, and that's sort of become, so I've been teaching online for over 20 almost 25 years now.
wow.
That's sort of become an area of expertise. I do a lot of training with that. So I think you have to be open to what comes about. And I started the online primarily so that I could go to baseball games in the summer. Because when you teach summer school, you're at night, like from 6 to 10, and that's just really doesn't work with baseball. And also it's more flexible with my dad. I could, because many times when I would get called out at 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. or whatever, and it's, so it worked really well with being able to just do my work when I could. I try to keep a schedule when I teach online, and I think that's important. But if life intervenes, so I think when people are looking at careers, you have to look at all of that. I will add that I did not get my doctorate until I was almost 40.
Oh, nice.
So, I spent all those other years, like I said, taught high school. I went to Europe. I taught high school.
Yeah.
I got a degree in counseling, worked as campus minister, did various things. I was not tied down at that point. So I was not geographically constrained when I was looking for things. Fortunate enough to have parents who supported me doing that. Because when somebody needed somebody to take care of them, I was always the one that had to, because my jobs were such that I could put them on hold and go help if somebody needed help, which is okay. I mean, that's just sort of the environment that I was raised in as the oldest daughter from the South. That's what you do. My great aunt, who was the oldest, took care of my grandfather and my grandmother. And then when my grandmother died when I was in high school, and then took care of my grandfather and his second wife, because she lived down there. So she was always it's just sort of expected. I mean, I don't know if they're raised that way anymore, but
I think it still is to some degree.
And so, but it's, there have been common themes. I've always done some sort of teaching. I've done some sort of writing, and stuff. And so I think you have to seek out things. Like I said, when I was in the doctoral program, I wasn't like introduced to STP or anything else. And I don't even remember how I found them, to be frank. I had volunteered to be on an STP committee when we were still doing everything by snail mail.
Yeah.
So, and by doing that, I think that was how I got involved in STP, because after that, I don't know whether it ended, I don't know whether they got rid of that committee or whatever. Then somebody said, because people will always pass your name along if you really are a good worker. I'm a pretty good worker, and I'm pretty organized, and I tend to do things fairly quickly, such that, I'm now a consulting editor on teaching a psych journal. I don't have a lot of journal articles per se published. I understand research. I've taught research methods a lot, but I think that there are ways that you can get involved and really do those kinds of things. I think you just have to be really flexible. I think you have to be open to what's going on. I think you have to decide what's most important. And I mean, some people are constrained. If you're married and have kids and your spouse is in a job that's not movable, then you have to look at what can you do in like a geographic sort of area. So it's really just sort of some of that. I used to, when I give this talk that I've given a couple times to Psych High, I start with the poem by Robert Frost, The Two Roads. So the two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry that I could not take both. And then it ends up with, I took the one less traveled, and that has made all the difference. It's wonderful. If you don't know the Robert Frost poem, it's a wonderful poem. And it really sort of applies to not getting into that mindset of, this is what I'm going to do, and this is all I can do. I think in college, well, coming out of high school, you need to have some sort of idea. You want to go into sciences? Do you want to go into more artsy? Do you want to go into medical kind of things? Because that's going to determine the courses that you need coming out of high school and coming out of college. I think but then when you get into college, I think you have to be open to what might be there. And I think you have to do a lot of exploration. And the same thing for like ECPs when you're in your program, because they're all at R1s. I mean, and so the faculty at R1s are like narrowly focused on, let's do research publishing in journals with like 90% rejection rates and everything else. And I think sometimes you have to look at yourself and look at what do you want. And actually, when you're choosing a graduate program, really think about that before you choose it, so that you find one that's a fit. And do more research on the programs. I mean, find one that's really a good fit, particularly if you're more of a traditional age student, and so you're going to be involved in departmental things, and and that's going to become your really core group of colleagues throughout your life.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a more there were a core of people who were like traditional age, who had trouble managing college students in terms of discipline, and I'm going, you just tell them to get out of the classroom if they don't behave. You can't do that in high school. You got to keep them in the classroom. Now I just tell them out. But so I think those are some of the things. I've look back. It looks like I've gone like this.
Yeah,
but
up and down, all over.
You end up. I kind of think you end up where you're supposed to be. And I can look at. I have a brother who's done sort of the same kind of thing. Took him a long time before he got a doctorate. He moved in and out of a lot of things for not some of the same reasons I did, but other reasons. And then I have a couple of just who always knew what they wanted to do, and they just straight line, straight and narrow. Sometimes I think it's luck that you end up on a job that really fits you. And because there are a lot of jobs advertised that you may not see. So I think you have to really cast a wide net when you're looking for a job. And I think you have to not be afraid if one's not working, move on to something else.
And I think that's one thing, being early career myself, from undergrad to graduate school to even now, it's this fear of you don't think you can find one that fits you, in the sense of you just need a job. So it doesn't matter. Like, they're holding all the cards per se. So you think that the person hiring or the graduate program hiring is holding all that power, and you're just lucky enough to be there. And so you don't necessarily look for fit as much as somebody who will accept you. And I think it's a great piece of advice to also do your research on them and make sure that you're going to fit in there, because you're going to be there for, 5 years if it's a graduate program, longer if it's a job. You want to make sure it's something that works.
And in graduate programs, because you can't, and I'm forever telling my undergrads this, it's not like undergraduate where if you don't like it, you can transfer.
Right.
You can't really do that in a graduate program. Well, you can, but you're going to lose all your credits. So you're starting over. And so I think, and I said, you have to be really sure of what you want to do, so that you may need to take a year and figure out what you want to do. So if you know that you want to teach college, then you need to choose a program where they do train future faculty. Because there are a lot of those in the psychology realm where they one of their purposes is to train future faculty, because we, a few years ago realized we kind of need to start training some of these people, if we're going to replace ourselves down the road. And so you need to choose one where they have that option, as opposed to one where, oh no, all we want you to do is just research with these people. And the other thing is that sometimes you have to just sort of do stuff to get out of a program. My dissertation was not entirely on something of my choosing.
Right.
Some of the skills down the road I began to realize really were useful, because I actually did a computer simulation.
Oh, nice.
Back when it was like this heavy, heavy laptop that I had to lug to my participants, called them subjects then, houses, because I needed, I was looking at novice and expert knowledge, which wasn't really entirely my area of interest. But when I was going back and forth with my advisor, somebody had said, just find something that you like. So I was like, so what would you suggest? So my advice to people in graduate programs is always find out what your advisors really want you to do. Once you get the letters, you can do work on what you want.
Yeah.
But you need to get out.
Yeah.
And so you have to, and so, I learned to work with early laptops. I learned a lot about content, or expert versus novice. So some cognitive, even though I really wasn't in the cognitive area. So, it had some value to it. So you just kind of have to sometimes do what you have to do in order. You've got to have I hate to say the eyes on the prize, but you know what you need to get to down the road. And you sometimes just have to do because in graduate school, they do actually control if you're going to get out or not. I mean,
I know. I remember having friends in graduate school who were like, but I don't want to do it this way. My advisor keeps telling me this and I don't want to do that. And I'm like, you just have to. Like, you don't have the control.
I mean, I remember I had to replace somebody on my committee because one of the original people moved. And so he came in really at the very end. I mean, I was like done. So we're having the last meeting on it, or I guess it was the orals. And so he goes, so why, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was some statistical or something. He says, so why did you do it this way? And I'm like,
because you told me to.
Yeah. Finally, my advisor said, well, we told her to do it that way. And because I'm trying to come up with some explanation, not like, well, they told me to do it that way.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and so then he was fine with that, but because he was new, he's not going to buck the senior professor in the department. And so sometimes it's just a matter of, you just have to do things and recognize that when you get out, you can research areas that you like and everything else. You can't burn the bridges. You can't be, because you never know when you're going to need that little pillar of that bridge or whatever, and stuff. But when you go into a job, I think we all tend to, I mean, we want to be employed. We don't want to be unemployed unless you're independently wealthy. And the job interview situation, I don't think is the best to really determine how you're going to fit in the department, because they're putting on their best foot. I will say I did have one interview where I drove up there. We all go out to dinner the night before the whole interview process starts, and they're talking about, hunting season starts in, because I asked why all these cars are driving around with all these gun racks, and they said, well, it's hunting season starts tomorrow, and started talking about that. And I knew right then and there that was not going to be a match, but I had to go through the process. I mean, now I would probably have said, let's not waste everybody's time tomorrow, because it's not gonna, I don't even think they had asked for more information. I didn't ever send it because I could tell that would not be a good fit. For the community. But that doesn't usually happen and they pick people from the department that they think you're going to get along with. So you're not really seeing all the departmental politics. So sometimes you get into a situation and you begin to realize all the stuff that's going on. I think you have to not be afraid to move. And I mean, you can always frame the moving in a way that you're not saying, these people were crazy. I couldn't work with them, because you don't want to do that, because you don't know who knows whom.
Right.
And stuff. So it's, I think you have to not be afraid to try and pursue something that's going to make you happier, because you don't want to be miserable for 40 years of your career.
Yeah.
And even if you get tenure, and then you're stuck there for, because I think once you get tenure, it's harder to just move more or less laterally. You've got to really be moving. And to do that, you've either got to do a lot of research that gets published and you become an international expert.
Right.
And so that they're looking for you, or you're moving to do specific things like Center for Teaching and Learning, or some teacher, training young faculty or something of that sort, and stuff. It's not super common to see somebody like become an associate professor and then just move to another institution and be a associate professor. So you sort of have those first years to kind of do that moving around if you're not happy, and stuff, because there's got to be something really that's going to set a job apart. If you've already got tenure and then they ask you, and then you decide, I just can't take it anymore, and you've got tenure and they're going to ask you, why are you moving? So if you're going to move to the same sort of institution, that becomes really problematic. Like if you've been doing research, if you're at a smaller school and you've been doing research and you want to move to like an R1, you can always talk about, I really needed to get to a place where research is more supported and those sorts of things. But if it's the same sort of institution, because I know I've been on search committees and we get letters or we get applicants who were in their 7th year and now they're applying for other jobs, and the letters you can tell have come from a colleague who knows them, because but you're still sitting there going, so why didn't they get tenure? Right. So there's always that concern. So sometimes it's better to take that leap earlier in the beginning. But you have to do what's going to fit you. And I know if you're in a dual career family, and it can be harder to move around. Sometimes you're limited geographically. And in that case, you have to look for ways that you can do things within the field. And fortunately, I mean, there's so much with online learning, so much with other forms of teaching these days that I think you can make a career and do a lot of things. I saw on the news this morning, they were talking, I don't remember the name of it. It's an Instagram account, and I don't do Instagram. But I can't remember the name. It was 2 women who have some sort of business on there. I'm assuming they have sponsors and other things that talk about toddlers and tantrums, and how do you deal with toddlers when they're having tantrums. And one of them, I think, is a psychologist, or at least that's what the news said. So I think, I'm not going to check it out, but there are a lot of things like that you can do, but you have to really begin, even the things like you're doing now with the podcast, that gives you a skill that can translate into other things down the road.
Right.
I don't really think you're making a ton of money on career podcasts for psychology faculty and stuff, but
not any.
Well, but it becomes, and that's the other thing that I think sometimes I've found younger faculty don't understand. You have to do a lot of free stuff before you get to the point where you get paid for it.
Stuff, yes.
And it's, my sister-in-law who works in marketing kind of things is appalled when she finds out that, when I went and spoke at NITOP 2 years ago, that I wasn't getting paid for it. I said,
that you actually pay to go there?
Well, I managed, because I was doing a workshop, to get a lot of it covered. But she's like, what do you mean they're not paying you? What do you mean? I'm going. My brother, who is also academic at a community college, keeps going, I keep trying to tell her this, but she just doesn't get it.
Right.
But you do these things.
Or like I wrote a chapter for a book and I was so excited, and my husband's like, how much are they paying you? And I'm like, they're not, but it's so exciting. It's my name.
Yeah, I get that. It's all the time. It's like, how much did you get paid for? No, I didn't get paid for it. It's just, you do it because you hope at some point it may lead into
something paid.
Well, or it gives you some skills that if you need to, you could pivot and create something whereby you could do it. So I think it's important. These days I think it's important for younger faculty to really develop their social media stuff. I do have a personal Facebook account. I have a Twitter account, which I've had for 10 years because I was an early adopter. But until last spring, when everybody moved to remote teaching, I wasn't really doing much with it at all.
Right.
I actually have 2 Twitter accounts. I have one for baseball, which I got, I don't even know how many years ago, because I had been pushing the baseball team, the minor league team I work with, or I've worked with some of the players, to get one. And so they got one, but they were doing some things during the games where if you tweeted something, you could win a prize. So I got an account just for that. I never won anything. So I actually have 2 Twitter accounts. But I hadn't done a lot. And somebody said, you need to get on there and give them some information about online teaching and so forth. So I became much more active. And you can really see, it's really interesting to look at some of the principles of psychology and play with, like,
there's a lot
retweets. And I did the international poster contest, the first one that STP did. I was on that committee. So I got on my Twitter account those couple of days to, retweet things and stuff like that. But it wasn't really anything that I do. And now that we're sort of like through the remote teaching emergency, I check into it. But I think for younger faculty, those
It's
things are
important.
really important. I don't know that much about Instagram, so I don't know how important that is. We decided in the membership committee not to add an Instagram to STP a few years ago. So it's just Twitter and Facebook. But I just think learning things like podcasting, learning some of those other social media related skills really are important. I don't do a lot of videos in my online classes because I don't really have time to create them because I'm teaching 5 classes and I also adjunct somewhere. So I don't really have time to create them and to create them so they look decent sort of thing. But I think those are and I think those are some of the skills that graduate schools ought to be looking at and frankly should be teaching because it's really...
I think it can help you get a job nowadays. If you have an online social media presence, people already know who you are. They're familiar with you. I know a lot of times kind of trying to get this podcast off the ground and trying to write a book, people are like, oh, if you have followers, you're more likely to get kind of a publishing contract or things like that. And so now it's turning into a currency of itself in getting jobs. And it's also just good to help, especially if you're in the teaching realm, to reach out to students for resources. I found a lot of different opportunities and jobs and most importantly, mentorship on Twitter. So just to stay current, like you were saying, you have to be kind of current in your field. I think social media helps a lot with that nowadays.
Yeah. And I mean, I know I tried actually to get a Twitter account for our department going a few years ago, but then some administration said, no, everything has to go through this person that was our social media person. I'm like, forget that. I don't have time to do all of that. So I just deleted the account sort of thing. But it's staying up with those things that are not just in the discipline, but outside of the discipline. I mean, we've got at STP, we have a STP tweeter.
Right.
And we've got people who run the Facebook group. We've got people who run the listserv. So particularly if you're interested in those kinds of things, there are ways to do that sort of service or volunteer to create one for your department.
Right.
I think you have to know how to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think just say, oh, because I mean, we have faculty who think that they're experts in technology and they don't even use folders in their email. They'll ask me something, I'll go in and they've got like this ginormous list. I'm going, how do you find it?
Find anything?
And stuff. And I mean, I know I've got too many and I need to clean them up and I don't always clean up things as quickly as I should. But I think you have to know what you're doing. I don't think you can. So you may need to do some workshops. I mean, I got introduced to Twitter at a ST. It was like the previous version of the ACT, of the Annual Conference on Teaching. Somebody did a session, which is when I first got my account, like a gazillion years ago, back when nobody was using it. When everybody's like, what is this? So I think you have to not just stay immersed in your specific discipline within psychology and with what's new in teaching in psychology, because I think that's really important if teaching is your primary goal. And that means that you know things about universal design, you know things about multiple methods of learning, not learning styles. My department knows that anytime I hear that, I'm in.
I know. I still cringe every time students write it in like an essay response.
Yeah, I teach a workshop for people on designing your online course, and it's faculty from all different departments, and at least every workshop I have to gently correct. I come in as a psychologist, I really, really have to say something here. So because universal design and accessibility were not an issue a few years ago.
Yeah.
But you need to know about that now. And so you have to keep up with your specific discipline, whatever it is, within psychology. You've got to keep up with the teaching literature. You've got to keep up with, if you're younger, well, even if you're older, but especially if you're younger, I think you need to keep up with these kind of things because podcasts and doing little videos and having a YouTube channel, and which I have too, but I don't ever do anything with it. I had to create one for a workshop I took one time. So I did. I created an introduction. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on that kind of stuff because I'm on the downslope, and I don't see a sense to spending a huge amount of time on stuff that, if I'm really interested, I'll do it. But otherwise, I don't have any actual benefit career-wise from it because it's not going to get me in. I mean, it's not going to help me at work. Right. I think trying to find somebody at your school that you can talk to about, would my doing this help? You probably have help at the institution because you've got media people, you've got like television studio sorts of things that can actually help you with the mechanics of it, sort of thing. Reaching out to people like you or Garth and Eric who do the psych sessions. I mean, if people are keeping up with STP, you can see that they've added 2 new types of psych sessions. One's on Sodal, and I can't remember what the other one with Marianne Lloyd they just added, but
I know there's like an ask one too, where you can ask your own questions.
That might be. Is that Marianne Lloyd's? I know I saw the announcement, but I knew Ropp was doing one on Sodal. And I saw that there was a second one. I think it was Marianne Lloyd doing it. And now I'm having a senior moment where I don't remember what it's about. But so those things that you can have automatically downloaded and stuff, it's like nobody knows phone numbers anymore. You have to go look them up because you just, now you just speak into your phone. You speak into your TV remote. You don't even know what channel anything is anymore. And for somebody who grew up with 2 TV channels, we didn't have all 3 networks. We had 2 TV channels. Is just, did their dissertation on an Apple IIc where you had to load the software every time, but was thrilled because that made it much easier to respace everything as opposed to a typewriter. And who started teaching with mimeograph machines, which none of you probably know what it is, but you had to you typed and it was sort of backwards and it was purple ink, and you took this purple thing and you put it on a big drum and you had to turn the drum and the pages came out purple. Ask your parents. They'll know what mimeograph papers are. So, and it's been a long time, but it really hasn't been that long where we get to this level of this sort of thing where you can, do coursework on a phone.
Yeah. And so you think about what it's going to look like 10, 30 years from now, it's going to be drastically different.
Right. So you have to keep up with that part of society kind of stuff.
Well, those are your students too. The students are in that realm, and you want to kind of meet your students where they are, at least somewhat.
Right. And so, but it's also, I think, important career-wise. I mean, I think it's important for teaching to, it's just like trying to find a new example for flashbulb memory.
Right.
I think now, unfortunately, now you've got George Floyd, which you're going to be able to use. But if you go back a few months, I mean, what do you use for flashbulb? You can't use the Kennedy assassination. You can't use the Challenger explosion. You can't really use 9/11 with a lot of them anymore because they know about it, but they don't really have the experience of it.
Yeah.
And so, what is it that, so the examples, trying to stay current with those kinds of things, you have to do, but you have to stay current with these kinds of other things that can help advance your career. Because not that I think you should always be thinking about what's in this for me, but I think you have to when you agree to do things.
Yeah.
And particularly for new professionals, don't agree to do everything, every talk, everything. Think about, be a little bit selfish. Think about, what does it mean for me? Can I build a connection from this? Is this going to help me with networking? I will say, if you do anything community-wise or otherwise, it's free. Document. Ask for a letter that talks about how wonderful you were. Keep the flyer that shows that you were talking about it, because you're going to need all of that. That's advice I give to new faculty, because for your portfolio, you got to have it. You're not going to be able to reconstruct that when it comes time. If you don't use it, you don't use it, but it's good to have it. But I think you have to think about doing things like your podcast that are going to set you apart. Mm-hmm. And if you were to move to a liberal arts college where teaching is really the foundation, this sort of thing would be golden.
Right.
Because you could easily, well, I mean, the topic of yours you could use with your students right now, but you could easily transition this skill to something else.
Yeah.
To another topic, not to something else. I mean, but, for right now, podcasts are sort of the in thing.
Right.
And, you have to have enough foresight to look at some of those coming trends.
Yeah. I'm even starting to use podcasts in teaching because I know that that's the way a lot of students want to consume information. And so I found a few podcast episodes out there that really hit on some of the content areas we talk about. And okay, well, let's not have you read a book since you don't really want to and you're not really learning that way. Let's have you listen to a podcast episode or something else.
I always try in my online classes. I have the textbook, I have journal articles depending on the level of the course. I mean, I don't have them if I'm teaching intro psych at a community college. But I'll find some good articles, semi-scholarly, that might talk about the same thing. I always try to include at least a TED Talk or some other similar sort of thing that's talking about the same topic. It's all about that multi level learning and that multiple ways of learning, so that it could reinforce what they're not reading in the textbook. So it's not the only thing I use to teach them, and it's
exactly
just kind of reiterates the topics in the first one. But I think you've got to stay ahead of the curve. I mean, you've got to look ahead at the trends. The more visionary you can be, the better off you're going to be. And then it's learning how to frame it when you go to look for a job. But I think it's also about thinking about, I have these skills. What kind of job can I get with these skills?
Right.
And it may be that what you really want is to teach college, but that may not be happening right now. So what can I do that would make me more marketable for teaching? I will say that if you want to teach at community college, you need to have adjuncted at a community college. We have not hired a single person who's not been an adjunct.
Yeah.
Because it's a different population, and we want to know that you have some understanding of them before we bring you on board full time. So, unfortunately, there are a lot of adjunct jobs out there right now. I mean, it's sort of, you can do that. You can keep your hand in sort of thing. So I think it's, it's important to do those kinds of things, but to also think more broadly about what can you do with your skills, because sometimes we don't get the job that we want.
Right.
I mean, I didn't start out saying, oh, I want to teach at a community college or what. I knew what I wanted to do. That wasn't really working out. But then I had the family thing. So then I have to find some way to earn money and support myself, because, my parents are not going to support me. I mean, know it. And so, you end up someplace, and I think you can make yourself happy in whatever position you're in. I mean, there's some things I just don't do because they're annoying. And, so I'm not going to do those. I'm tenured now, so I can do that. But I mean, I did a lot of stuff my first 2 years till I got tenure. But, you can suck up anything for a short time.
Yeah.
And, I'm not going to like everything I have to do. Nobody likes everything they have to do with their job. If they do, I would wonder about that person. I mean, really, I mean,
I've never met them.
Yeah, I've never, who likes everything about their job and everybody that they have to deal with. And, it's just not realistic. But I think, psychology certainly gives everybody a lot of skills to use in a lot of ways. Yeah. And it's not like a degree in accounting where here's your job, here's your degree, here's your job.
Yeah.
Here are all the skills you've got. Now you've got to figure out how it fits into a job. And so, and I think that sometimes ECPs are geared toward R1 research institution jobs. And there are a lot of other opportunities out there. And if you just look at STP and look at their leadership and all the other things, these people have done like tremendous things. And they're not all publishing in 90% rejection journals.
Yeah.
But, I think they've had a big impact. So
I think so too.
I'd like to think they do. But So
no, but I really like the idea of looking ahead in your future and your career too, because that's exactly where I am at, being early career and needing to kind of set myself up for any kind of transition,
yeah,
where you're at a spot where you're not necessarily guaranteed your job and you need to be able to pivot at any moment. So I'm constantly just trying to build my resume enough to get a new job should it be needed.
right.
And so that's something that starting early on kind of looking at that future is helpful.
Well, and even just looking at because you're at a stage where you can just look at what's out there. And if something really looks intriguing, then you haven't really lost anything by going for it. I mean, as long as you can move your family. I mean, as long as if I got this job, I can move my family. I'm not going to have to do a long distance family or whatever. But I wouldn't advise somebody to apply for a job that, if you're living in California and your partner or spouse can't move, don't apply for a job in Minnesota.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you really want to do a long distance relationship. So don't apply for it, because then if you get along in the interview process and then people find out, no, you're not moving, they're going to be really annoyed and stuff. And it's not going to help you any. But certainly, I would hope that people talk to their partner about, I've seen this. This looks very interesting. What do you think about, let's just give it a shot. You got to give it a shot. And you don't have to put down, and this is another reason to be involved in things like STP, because when they're asking for names of references, you can put down other people without having to put down people at your institution so that they don't know you're looking.
Right.
I mean, sometimes it's not really, you don't really want to let them know that you're like starting to explore or just looking for other opportunities. And I would say keep a finger in the pie of all those job opportunities that are out there, and really cast a wide net with a lot of them, because there might be something that really would be a really good fit for you, but you've got to go for it when it's there. You can't wait until, like, say in 4 years you decide, okay, I'm ready to move, even though, when the job's coming to an end or whatever, that job may not be there because somebody else is taking it. So you kind of have to stay a step ahead and think about that, and not be afraid to at least apply for things. I mean, at worst, you don't even hear back from them, which I think is one of the worst things that's happened to higher education. You just at least get a letter saying, thank you for applying.
Right.
I mean, how long does it do now to do a form email and stuff? But, you kind of have to keep your eye out there, because sometimes there are jobs that are really uniquely configured and sometimes can just be a really good fit. And you can even look at the place and the job description and say, oh, I could add this other thing to it, and it would just be a great position. But so you kind of have to spend a little bit of your time doing that. Even if you're in a job that you really love, unless you're tenured, you still have to kind of, unfortunately, in our business, you kind of have to be thinking ahead.
Well, yeah, that's exactly in my spot. So I'm non-tenure track, which means I don't get tenure. I don't ever go up for it. And so even if I love my job and even if they love me, if, COVID-19 happens and funding disappears, the job is gone.
Yeah.
Or if something happens, the job can be gone. And so at any moment's notice, you might need to find a new one. And so kind of constantly keeping your eye out on what's going on and making sure your resume is up to date can be pretty important at a stage like that.
Right. And that's again, goes back to knowing people in professional organizations or other things, or even if you have a good colleague in your department or another department at your institution that you could say, look, I'm applying for this. I know I'm not letting it be widely known. Can I put you down as a reference?
Yeah.
Is really helpful to have those kind of people. And I think by being involved in the professional organization and committees and other things, that gives you that opportunity and stuff. And then you don't have to tell your own institution that, well, I'm looking because this is not really working for me now. If it's not working for you, it's probably not working for them. But, you want to, best defense is, offense, defense. You want to play offense.
Because you don't want to tell them you're leaving and then you don't leave.
Right.
And then it's either
Right.
just an awkward situation or they try to get you out.
Right. And sometimes, and I don't know why, even if everything is okay and nobody's really in any problem situations, there can be better fits, or there can be reasons why you want to move. I mean, maybe in a fairly small town and you want to get back to a bigger city.
Right.
And sometimes faculty will take those kind of things personally.
Yeah.
And so, and sometimes you can't tell that until you bring up an issue like that. So I think it's important. I mean, I don't mean the second you land at one place to start looking, but I think you always have to be looking ahead until you, and then even once you get tenured. I mean, I have, as I mentioned before we even started recording, I've applied for other jobs just because I've had seen a couple out there, and a couple of them somebody had sent to me and said, "Look, you're perfect for this." I had family reasons. I stopped one where I was actually through the phone interviews of the process because of family reasons. I wasn't going to be able to move, so I wasn't going to let them I wasn't going to risk having them bring me in and then do all that and then say, "Oh, well, I can't really."
Right.
I mean, assuming I would get offered, I can't really take this job. For one thing, that just really annoys people. And then you're starting to burn bridges that you don't need to burn because you don't know what's going to happen down the road. So even at my stage, I still read the job ads just to see. There's it's harder to do lateral moves, but who knows what's out there. Now I look at things like visiting professor things, sort of like a visiting nurse. You could go from one place to the other. Those are other ways to get into places. There are a number of ads that I've seen fairly recently for visiting professor, like you're taking a semester or sometimes a year for somebody on sabbatical. That gets you in, gets you some experience. Nobody's going to look at it as, "Oh, she didn't last," because the title is visiting. I did visiting one semester when I was hopping all around. I was a visiting assistant professor. So it's about thinking about what you want and how you can get where you want, but it's also thinking about keeping the options open. I think that's really key because you just don't know what's going to come.
Right.
You don't know what's out there. And, if the pandemic has shown anything, it's shown that we can't assume that everything's just going to be copacetic and just continue as it always is.
Yes.
I've been saying for years, everybody should be trained to teach online, even if they're not going to teach online and it's not their favorite format.
And now we have to all teach online.
Well, I bit my tongue. I did not say to my administration, "I told you so." So wanted to badly, but I didn't. But even 5 or 6 years ago, I said, this is a skill everybody should have. You begin 5, 6, 7 years ago, you began to see it appearing in job ads. Once you see something appearing in job ads, you better get that training, even if that's not what you want to do. Yeah. So if you're going to be teaching, like now, if you're going to be teaching stats or research methods, you better know R. You better know, and again, I'm just having a senior moment on the other free one that everybody talks about. I don't remember.
Jasper.
Yeah, JASP. They're like 2 or 3 different, like kind of free sort of statistical things that are mentioned by people who teach stats and who live in that world. If you're looking at statistics and research methods is one of the things that you could teach, you better get familiar with those. So you need to know what's happening there, because that makes you more employable than if not. So and even at my institution, I think one of the things, we get so many emails, that they're going to expect that people can teach online coming in for the next time we do job searches.
I definitely noticed on all the job ads recently, online's becoming obviously something that they need because that's what's happening. But there was already kind of a trend towards that too, because I think a lot of students want online because they're just, the landscape of student life is different now. They need full-time jobs and other things going on.
Well, and they can get full financial federal aid They can get full financial federal aid if they are full-time online. They used to not be able to. There was a change about 10 years ago. I could go into that whole history of online learning and financial aid. But I think that a lot of schools are still going to stay primarily face-to-face once it's safe to go back.
Yeah.
But like I said everybody should be trained. I mean, I've had colleagues who took the training and just, this is not, and taught a course because they thought, this is not for me, and never taught another online again. But the issue is you're trained, you know how to do it, you know how to construct the class. And so in this kind of emergency, you can do it. And also I've been saying everybody should have a lot of stuff in their LMS because everybody has an LMS section because of grading.
Right.
And if they had enforced that, we wouldn't have had so many problems when people had to pivot over spring break.
And that was what was great about kind of being young and early career at this point is I already had every assignment on the LMS. So the only thing that really needed to switch was lectures.
Right.
And if you had nothing on it, then it'd be difficult.
Well, and we've always had a policy. You have to have an announcement. You have to have welcome. You have to have your contact. You have to use it for grading. You have to put your syllabus and that information up. And I had been saying people should be putting some content. They should be putting their assignments, some of that, because it's, first of all, you don't have to print it out then. If the students want it, they can print it out.
Right.
It'll save a tree.
Yeah.
It'll save a lot of trees. We only have one copy machine for faculty, and it's like two buildings over. Who wants, so that's kind of a pain. So, but even though we'd had some of those, they weren't enforcing it. Nobody was checking it.
Yeah.
And so when you get in those situations, then it becomes more problematic. So I think that's just, but I think facility with using the LMS, because you have to know, and this is where you need to do more training with it, both on pedagogy of online and then also with using the various LMSs. I mean, the more fluent you are in LMSs, I can work in 8 of them. I've taught at least 8 different ones now.
Wow.
Some of them no longer exist. So, but, I can import my courses. I actually would prefer to do that myself because then I can pick what I want and fix the dates, as opposed to having somebody else do it for me. I can do all those kinds of things and stuff. And it just means that tech support doesn't have to bother with me. Yeah. I'm not bothering them unless there's some kind of bug in there. So I think the more fluidity you have with that kind of thing, the better off you're going to be. But it's looking about things like you can record your lectures because you know how to do this podcast thing. You can record a lecture using a camera on your desktop in YouTube or within your, so you can do very simple ones, but there are way too many faculty who don't have any of those skills and don't want to learn them. Like I said, I can do it. I don't particularly like to do it. I think it takes way too much time because I think you need to storyboard it and write out your script. And if you're going to do as opposed to just stand there and talk, you have to write it. It's like a speech. When I do speeches, I write them out. I may not read it exactly word for word because I hate people that just read stuff word for word, but I have to write it all out first. And when I do a course, I storyboard it out on paper. Sometimes just handwritten sort of thing before I ever start doing anything in the LMS. So that you have to do that to do a video lecture. I know how to do a video lecture. I don't really like them, but I can do them if I have to.
Right.
I learned how to use Zoom and Collaborate and all when they first came out. I'm so tired of Zoom meetings right now, but
but you knew how to do them.
But I know how to do it and stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think it's you've got to do that. And I think institutions really have an obligation to make older faculty or more established faculty learn these skills as well. And I think if you come in as a young faculty and you have these skills, you can offer to help train or create like little training modules or something for more experienced faculty who don't have some of these skills.
Right. And then that sets you apart. And
absolutely.
Shows initiative and all that.
And stuff. And so you have to, when you're writing applications and other things, you have to talk about your facility with using XYZ technology and training, things like Respondus and things, Camtasia, or any of the other lecture capture sorts of things. There are a lot of situations where you can get free workshops on them.
Right.
And so I think you have to expand beyond the psychology, because again, you can use, as I've said before, you could take and use this skill for all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Including things that you get paid for.
Hopefully someday.
Well, you just have to I think you have to have a bunch of them in the can, so that you can show that you can do it. People aren't going to just take your word that you walk it, but you can do that. You can look at, Instagram channels or YouTube channels where they're paying people to do makeup tutorials. You certainly could come up with tutorial things for parents or students. You look at Stephen Chu, who gives away all of his videos on learning and stuff. But I could see some of those sorts of things for money. For sponsors or, I know some things are sponsored, some are people paying to belong to the channel or whatever. But it's a matter of taking workshops on how do you make money from YouTube? How do you make money from Instagram?
Right.
Because we're not going to learn that you're not going to learn that in grad school. So it's really just kind of being creative. I think you have to think beyond, okay, I'm going to go into a classroom Monday and Wednesday from 9 to 10:30, and I'm going to stand up there and lecture. I'm going to use a couple PowerPoints. Please God, I'm not going to read from the PowerPoint slides, but I'm going to, and I'm not going to use the buzzword active learning anymore because we've moved beyond that, so that you're going to think beyond that to what can I do? And then the other thing is sometimes you're going to need to supplement your salary because frankly,
don't always get paid a lot.
No, you don't. Nobody really goes in education to make a lot of money.
Right.
But
it'd still be nice.
Yeah, it would be. And there may be more openness to that after all these parents have had to homeschool.
Yeah.
So there may be a little more readiness to not cut education budgets as much as there was. I don't know that will trickle to college level, but I think you just have to think beyond what they teach you in graduate school.
Yeah.
And what you see in graduate school. And as I've said, it's not a major where you get the degree and you walk into a job. You may have to create even with the doctorate, you're not necessarily walking into a job. You've got to create your job, and you've got to figure out, do I want to do research? Do I want to teach? Do I want to teach just graduate students? Do I want to teach undergraduates? You've got to spend a lot of time self-reflecting and figuring out what you really want.
Right.
You have to be open to alternatives, but you got to know that before you do anything else.
Yeah.
I didn't apply to any R1s because I knew that's not what I wanted. I don't know that I would have gotten a job at an R1. I didn't have enough research. Well, of course, back then, nobody really had a lot of publications when you graduated.
Yeah.
You really didn't. You didn't. We'd never get jobs today competing with you guys. Never.
No, I don't have enough publications for an R1.
I used to tell the ECP council all the time, or committee all the time, I'm glad I'm not competing against you guys for jobs because I would never get one. Because I saw all their CVs when they were applying to be on the committee. I would never, but it's a different world now.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have to do those things. But I think it's just about being flexible. It's about what's going to fit with your life and what you need. And sometimes other things other than the career you want has to take precedence.
Yeah.
It just does. It may be your own health. It may be a family health issue. It may be that even if you could get a job teaching at a college, it's not going to pay enough to pay for whatever it is your family needs.
Yeah.
So it may be that you decide to, take an industry sort of job because they pay more. And so I think you have to, and there's a lot of literature out there. You can't tie all your happiness into a job because it's not a guarantee.
Yeah.
It's a different world. I mean, when my parents came out of college, and my dad was first generation college, so he came out. You could take a job with one company and stay with it until you retired.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way anymore.
It doesn't work that way anymore. So,
well, it was like you were saying, now you can create your own job a lot easier than you used to be able to in the past. You can create your own way.
Yeah. I mean, you really could do something with these kind of podcasts, like on an Instagram or YouTube channel. Like I said, I saw the thing with the mother that I think is a psychologist that it was something about, they were talking about 2-year-olds and tantrums. So I don't know exactly I don't remember because I wasn't really listening that closely, but the advice I heard was absolutely sound coming. And it was really what we would give. I'm giving a talk to the local preschool parents about how you deal with toddlers and tantrums. So clearly there was somebody with some psychological knowledge or background doing it. It's just, you have to really think about them. You have to be creative and come up with what's your expertise. College teaching doesn't seem to make a lot of money any way you spin it, but it's, I think there are ways to do it. For instance, helping high school students prep for college.
Right.
Those sorts of things where parents are going to pay for it. So, how to get my child in college. So,
like SAT tutors are a pretty big business.
Right. But even beyond that, it's like, how do you help them choose the right college? How do you help them figure out where they're going to fit? There are a lot of things that somebody with a background in psychology could help them do. Yeah. And, and then helping students learn to navigate that first year of college. I could see that with getting paid. Right. It would take, you can't say, I'm going to do this, put it up tomorrow, and you start making tons of money. It takes a little bit more time, but I think there are opportunities there. You just have to think about it. Yeah. And so I'm just going to wait and see what people come up with.
It should be fascinating, if anything, just to see where it goes.
I mean, whoever thought we'd be doing this kind of podcast? I mean, I've done interviews on careers, but it's been over the telephone, and then it went to email, and that was like, woo, email.
But, I know. I just can't wait to see what the next one will be.
Yeah. Well, you guys will be in the forefront. I'm just watching all the ECPs in the forefront of it. Let you guys do all this. Not us.
Well, thank you. That was a lot of really good advice.
Oh, thanks. Glad to help anytime.
Thank you so much for listening. Head over to our website at careerjourneypodcast.com for more info, the latest episodes, and to join the discussion about careers. See you next time.